You are being manipulated right now, not by me, not by this video, but by someone in your life, perhaps multiple people. And the most disturbing part is that you might not even register it as manipulation because you have been conditioned to mistake it for normal social interaction. Picture this moment. You are sitting across from someone, a friend, a colleague, a lover. They are speaking to you with warmth. They are smiling. Their body language is open. They ask you a question. What do you think we should do? It feels collaborative. It feels safe. It feels like respect. But something underneath the surface is wrong. You answer honestly. You offer your perspective. And then with surgical precision, they guide the conversation in a direction that was already predetermined. Your input was never needed. It was collected, filed away, used as data. You were not a participant in that decision. You were a variable being measured. This is manipulation, not the cartoonish villain kind, not the screaming, gaslighting, obvious kind. This is the kind that operates in the gaps between words, the kind that leaves no evidence, the kind that makes you feel like you chose something that was chosen for you. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He knew that the most effective forms of power are the ones that do not announce themselves. He knew that the prince who rules through visible force is always one rebellion away from collapse. But the prince who rules through invisible influence, through the architecture of perception, through the careful arrangement of choices, that prince is untouchable. Most people think manipulation is binary. Either you are being manipulated or you are not. Either someone is lying to you or they are telling the truth. This is a child's understanding of power. The reality is far more layered, far more intricate. Manipulation exists on a spectrum, a hierarchy, and most people operate within the first two tiers without ever realizing there are three more levels above them. Levels so sophisticated that even naming them feels like exposing a state secret. Today, we are going to map that hierarchy. We are going to dissect the 5 tiers of manipulation, from the clumsy, obvious attempts that insult your intelligence, all the way up to the kind of influence that rewrites your sense of reality itself, without you ever noticing the brushstrokes. But here is the warning. Once you see this architecture, once you understand how these tiers operate, you cannot unsee it. You will start recognizing the patterns everywhere. In your relationships, in your workplace, in the media you consume, in the political theater you were told is democracy. And most disturbingly, you will see which tier you have been operating on. Which tier has been used against you, and you will have to make a choice. Do you stay at the level you are at, comfortable in your ignorance, or do you climb? Because climbing means becoming the thing you once feared. It means letting go of the comforting belief that people are fundamentally good, fundamentally honest, fundamentally operating with your best interests at heart. Let's begin. The first tier is not subtle. It is not elegant. It is the manipulation of a child who has not yet learned to hide their intent. This is the person who uses guilt, anger, or overt emotional coercion to get what they want. They do not disguise it. They do not need to, because the people around them have been trained to submit to volume. You see this everywhere. The partner who raises their voice until you back down. The boss who implies your job is at risk if you do not comply. The friend who weaponizes their sadness to make you cancel your plans and attend to their crisis again. This is manipulation at its most visible. And because it is visible, it is also the easiest to defend against once you recognize it. The problem is that most people do not recognize it. They think the screaming is passion. They think the guilt trip is care. They think the threat is honesty. Machiavelli would call this the tyranny of the weak. It is loud because it has no other option. It is aggressive because it lacks sophistication. The Tier 1 manipulator has no frame control. They are constantly fighting to impose their will because their will is not naturally compelling. They have to force it. But here is the trap. If you are only aware of Tier 1 manipulation, you will spend your entire life thinking you are safe as long as no one is yelling at you. You will walk into a conversation with someone calm, composed, smiling, and you will let your guard down. You will think, finally, a reasonable person. And that is when the real predators strike. Tier 2 is where most people live. This is the realm of transactional manipulation. The social contract. The unspoken bargain. I do this for you, so you owe me that. It is not overt. It is not violent. It is simply the way society has agreed to function. The Tier 2 manipulator understands reciprocity. They understand that humans are wired to return favors, to avoid feeling indebted, to maintain social equilibrium. So they give you something, not out of generosity, but as an investment. They are buying your compliance in advance. Watch how this works. Someone offers to help you move. You did not ask. They volunteered. A week later, they ask you for a favor, something you do not want to do, but you feel the weight of the debt. You think, well, they helped me, so I should help them. You say yes. You have been manipulated, but it feels fair, doesn't it? It feels like the natural order of relationships. Give and take, balance, equity. Machiavelli knew better. He wrote, "Men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived." The Tier 2 manipulator exploits the myth of fairness. They create the illusion of balance while ensuring the scales are always tipped in their favor. The gift is never free. The compliment is never without agenda. The kindness is never unconditional. Every interaction is a ledger. Every gesture is an invoice that will be collected later. And the brilliance of Tier 2 is that it hides behind morality. If you refuse the favor, you are the bad person. You are ungrateful. You are selfish. The manipulator has framed the situation so perfectly that your only socially acceptable option is to comply. Most people never escape this tier. They spend their entire lives in an endless loop of transactional exchanges, never realizing that they are being slowly drained by people who give just enough to take far more. But there is a level above this, a level where transactions are no longer necessary, because at Tier 3, you do not trade for compliance, you engineer it. Tier 3 is where manipulation becomes invisible. This is no longer about convincing you to do something. This is about creating an environment where the thing they want you to do feels like your own idea. The Tier 3 manipulator does not argue with you. They do not persuade you. They do not bribe you with favors or guilt. They simply arrange the variables of your reality in such a way that your decision is inevitable. Think about it. Have you ever walked into a store with no intention of buying anything and walked out with a purchase? The layout of the store was designed. The lighting was designed. The music was designed. The placement of products was designed. The scarcity signals, the sale signs, the only 3 left tags, all designed. You were not convinced. You were architected into a decision. This is Tier 3, the manipulation of context. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote about fortune. He said that fortune is like a river. When it floods, it destroys everything. But a wise prince does not fight the flood. He builds levees in advance. He shapes the terrain so that when the water comes, it flows exactly where he wants it to go. The Tier 3 manipulator is building levees in your mind. They are shaping your perception of what is possible, what is normal, what is desirable. They are not forcing you. They are making force unnecessary. In relationships, this looks like someone who slowly, subtly shifts the terms of engagement. They do not demand that you stop seeing your friends. They just sigh every time you mention them. They create a small friction, a tiny discomfort, and over time, you stop mentioning your friends. You stop seeing them, not because you were told to, but because the path of least resistance led you there. In politics, this looks like the careful curation of information, not censorship, not propaganda in the crude sense, just the quiet prioritization of certain narratives over others, the repetition of certain phrases until they become the only language you have to describe a problem. You think you are forming your own opinions, but the menu of acceptable opinions was written long before you sat down. Tier 3 is terrifying because it is ambient. It is the air you breathe. You do not notice it until you step outside and realize how thick it was. But even this is not the top, because Tier 3 still operates within the realm of behavior. It manipulates what you do. Tier 4 manipulates who you are. At Tier 4, manipulation transcends action and enters identity. This is no longer about controlling your choices. This is about controlling your sense of self. The Tier 4 manipulator does not tell you what to do. They tell you who you are. And once you accept that identity, your behavior follows automatically. This is the realm of deep psychological influence, the kind that parents, lovers, and cult leaders use, often without even realizing it. It works through a simple mechanism, mirroring and redefinition. They observe you. They learn your insecurities, your desires, your fears, and then they reflect a version of you back at you. slightly altered, slightly improved, or slightly diminished, depending on their goal. You are so logical, so rational, not like other people who are ruled by emotion. Now you have an identity, and every time you feel an emotion, you suppress it, because to express it would contradict the identity you have accepted. The manipulator has installed a governor in your psyche. They do not need to tell you what to do anymore. You police yourself. Or the opposite. You are so sensitive, so empathetic. You feel things more deeply than others. Now every boundary you try to set feels like a betrayal of your nature. Every time you want to say no, you hear that voice. But I am empathetic. I am supposed to care. The manipulator has turned your strength into a chain. Machiavelli did not write explicitly about this because it operates below the level of politics, but he understood the principle. He knew that the most powerful control is the control that makes the victim an accomplice in their own subjugation. Tier 4 manipulators are often the most loved because they make you feel seen. They make you feel understood. They give you a narrative about yourself that is compelling, coherent, and just false enough to serve their purposes. And the cruelest part? You will defend this identity. You will fight for it, because to question it is to question the core of who you think you are. The manipulator does not need to defend their influence. You do it for them. But there is one final tier, one level that sits above even identity manipulation. A level so rare, so complete, that most people will never encounter it. And those who do will not realize it until years later, if ever. Tier 5 is not manipulation in the traditional sense. It is the absence of manipulation, which is, paradoxically, the most total form of control. At this level, the manipulator does not impose, they do not shape, they do not mirror. They simply withdraw. They become a void. And human beings, terrified of voids, will fill them with whatever the manipulator wants. Think of the master who says nothing, the leader who offers no opinion, the lover who goes silent. The absence is louder than any words. It creates a vacuum, and vacuums demand to be filled. You find yourself trying to please them, even though they have asked for nothing. You find yourself guessing what they want, even though they have given no signal. You reshape yourself, not because they told you to, but because the emptiness is unbearable. You need their approval, their acknowledgement, their return, and so you offer it. You offer everything. Machiavelli hinted at this when he spoke of the prince who is feared being safer than the prince who is loved. But there is something beyond fear and love. There is mystery. The prince who cannot be read, the prince who gives nothing away. That prince is not feared. That prince is worshipped. Because humans crave certainty. And when you deny them certainty, they will create it themselves, always in your favor. The Tier 5 manipulator does not need to lift a finger. They have trained you to manipulate yourself on their behalf. They have made you the architect of your own cage. And the cage is so perfectly fitted to your psychology that you call it freedom. This is the rarest form. Because it requires absolute discipline. It requires the ability to withstand the human need for connection, for validation, for reaction. Most people cannot sustain it. They break. They reveal themselves. They need to be seen. But those who can hold the void, who can remain perfectly still in the center of chaos, they do not just manipulate. They transcend. They become a gravitational force. People orbit them. People destroy themselves trying to reach them. And they watch, silent, unmoved, untouchable. You have now seen the architecture. 5 tiers. From the brute to the void. From the obvious to the invisible. From the manipulation of behavior to the manipulation of reality itself. And now the question is not whether you are being manipulated. You are. The question is, at which tier? Are you being yelled at? Tier 1. Easy to spot. Hard to escape if you are conflict averse. Are you trapped in endless transactions? Tier 2. The prison of reciprocity. Are you making choices that feel like yours but serve someone else? Tier 3. You are in the architecture. Are you living out an identity someone else gave you? Tier 4. You are the accomplice. Are you filling a silence with your own destruction? Tier 5. You are worshiping the void. And the even harder question, which tier are you using? Because once you see this, you cannot pretend you do not know. You cannot pretend that your kindness is always kindness, that your gifts are always gifts, that your silence is always silence. Machiavelli did not write The Prince to teach virtue. He wrote it to teach sight, to show rulers, and by extension anyone who reads it, that power is not about what you want. It is about what others perceive. It is about the invisible hand that shapes the board before the game begins. You can choose to stay blind. You can choose to remain at Tier 1 or Tier 2, trading favors, reacting to provocations, believing that the world is more or less fair. Or you can climb. You can learn to see the strings. You can learn to cut them. You can learn, eventually, to pull them yourself. But understand this: the higher you climb, the lonelier it gets. Because once you see others as systems, as predictable patterns of ego and fear, it becomes very difficult to see them as people. And once you start operating at Tier 3 or beyond, you are no longer playing the same game as everyone else. You are playing a different game entirely. One where connection is optional, where trust is tactical, where love itself becomes a variable. Is that worth it? I do not know. That is not my question to answer. That is yours. But what I do know is this: the world does not care whether you are ready to see it as it is. It will operate on you regardless. The tiers exist whether you acknowledge them or not. The only choice you have is whether you want to be aware of the game or whether you want to keep pretending you are not a piece on someone else's board. The void is always there, waiting, silent, patient, and it does not care if you fill it.